Today's class that we're doing now is based around Roman gods and goddesses. So what we're going to look at here is the names of the Roman gods, a bit about the family tree behind it, why they were important as a state religion, and also just on the off chance you see it in different translations or comes up in different questions, what were the Greek names of the gods. So what you might do now is you might pause this video, guys, and just jot down. First of all, can you think of the names of any gods and goddesses, either in their Greek names or their Roman names, and also then what were the gods and goddesses of? Now, once you've unpaused that, let's go through them one by one and see how right you were. So, what we're going to examine here is down the bottom left-hand side of the screen. So, where it says Jupiter and Juno, and then the follow-on from that with Bacchus, Vulcan, Mars, and Minerva. We're looking at this side of the Roman gods family tree. Now, what you will also find is that there's various versions and various different origin stories behind all of the Roman gods. Same with the Greek gods, quite similar to any Marvel or DC movie that you'll see, like a comic book, like any super team. They all have different origin stories throughout their histories and throughout different cultures. If you're asked about them in an exam, on the off chance they come up, either one of them is going to be good. Either one of them would work. But I'm just giving you the basic one here that at least you have one version of story that you can go with. So why I've picked the ones on the left-hand side, bottom left-hand side of the screen as well, is that they were the main gods of the state religion in Rome. As well as being the main gods of the state religion in Rome, they would have also been part of the Greek gods, but adapted and changed for Roman culture. The first one we're going to look at is probably the most famous of the bunch. When you paused earlier, I would assume that most 90% of you would have said this. Either Jupiter or Zeus. So Jupiter is his Roman name, Zeus was his Greek name. He was the king of the gods, and he was the god of thunder and lightning. Now, Jupiter was married to Juno, who was also his sister. She's known as Hera in Greek, but she was also the goddess of women. Now, the fact that a brother and sister get married here is quite a common theme throughout mythology. And you'll see that as we're going through the family tree, and the reason I'm focusing on this family tree specifically is that it is complex and complicated and a little bit messed up. So Jupiter and Juno have 3 children. They have Vulcan, who's the god of forges and craftsmen. Very important to note here. They have his sister Venus, who's known as Aphrodite in Greek, and she's the goddess of love and beauty. And they have Mars, who's the god of war. Now, Venus is an important one to know as well, because if you look at her origin stories, other stories say she was born from the sea, that she came from a shell, and that's why you'll often see this in Renaissance literature. So if you're doing this for junior cert history, and you're talking about Roman gods and goddesses, this is why this is important. Now, because she's the goddess of love and beauty, she is also married to her brother, who was Vulcan, which was the god of forges and craftsmen. So Vulcan, Venus, and Mars. Now, going back to the family tree slightly, we have Jupiter and Juno, and now we're looking at the siblings of Jupiter and Juno, who would also be the nieces, the uncles and aunts of Vulcan, Mars, and Venus. So Neptune was the god of the sea, controlled everything we know about the sea, as known as Poseidon in Greek. So any Roman translations that you may be doing, or any Latin translations around sea or ships or anything like that, will always have some mention towards Neptune. This is the god of the underworld, but again, you may know him better as Hades or Pluto, as he is in Greek. So the thing with the Greek gods is, as well as being the god of the underworld, Pluto was one name for him, but Hades was also known as the god of the underworld. And just be careful if you see Hades. Hades was both the god of the underworld and the name of the underworld itself. Vesta is now another interesting one. So Vesta would have been another sister of Neptune and Jupiter and Juno. Vesta was known as Hera in Greek, and she's the goddess of the home or the hearth. Okay? So when we talk about Lares and Penates and household gods, they're all, I suppose in a way, subservient to Vesta. Okay? The other part of this, which is really interesting for both your Latin course and for your Roman history course, if you're doing in junior cert history, is Vesta and the importance that she had in Rome. And what we're looking at here is the Vestal Virgins. So Vesta was a goddess of the state, but she had her own shrine in the Forum where fire burned constantly. It was tended to by 6 women called the Vestal Virgins, and they were chosen from Rome's leading families. Now, it was a privilege to be selected for the job. If you were selected, not only was the highest honour you could be given, that it was a huge honour for your family, it showed that you were the most influential, the most powerful, the wealthiest, the most important to God. I think it was state God, to guard her, to guard her shrine. But the thing was, it's as good as a life sentence here. Okay, if you think of it as nuns, okay, she took a vow of chastity. She also had to do the job for 30 years. So depending on when she was chosen, more often than not, it was the equivalent of a death sentence. That you literally did it to death. Because again, we're talking about Roman times where the life expectancy is much, much shorter. So this was essentially a job for life. The other sister of Vesta, Dis, and Neptune, and she'd be an aunt to Mars, Venus, and Vulcan, was Ceres, the goddess of agriculture. Oats, grains, wheats, crops, everything was seen to be praying to Ceres. That's where the word cereal comes from. So, as well as this basic family tree that we have with Jupiter and Juno and their children, and Venus, who married Vulcan, Zeus had other children as well, or Jupiter, in this case, if we're talking about in the Latin context, had other children. He had Diana, who was the goddess of moon and hunting. He also was responsible for Diana's twin, who was Apollo. So Apollo is the only god that we'll have here today who has the same name in both Greek and Roman. He was Diana's twin. He was obviously the son of Jupiter, but look at the importance that was placed on Apollo. He was the god of sun. He was the god of healing, of music and prophecy. Now this is significant. The Romans saw themselves, as well as borrowing their ideas from the Greeks, the world's authority on music, on culture, on language. So they gave an important job like music to him. The idea of healing is self-explanatory. They also placed that importance on Apollo. The sun is central to life. You can't have life without it. A sun is essential for growth. Apollo was the god of that. And also, knowing what we know about the Romans and their superstitions and their prophecies, he was also the god of prophecy, of being able to foretell the future. So when the Romans were looking for omens, or when they were praying or looking for lucky signs in battle, Apollo was the guy that they were looking for. You then have Minerva, and Minerva was another daughter of Jupiter, who was born another way, nothing to do with Juno or Hera, but Minerva was known as Athena in Greek. So Athena in Minerva was the goddess of craft and war. So Athena was so important in Greek culture that Athens, the main city, the birth of civilization, the city that brought all that about, is named after her. So it's interesting to note that the Romans both have a goddess of war in Athena and a god of war in her stepbrother, who's Mars. With Athena, or with Minerva and Athena, obviously the Romans could not use the name Athena. Even though it's well known that they borrowed their ideas from the Greeks, they couldn't be seen to be literally copying the Greeks at the same times. So Minerva was the goddess of war, but the goddess of Rome was called Roma. Okay, so she's not here in the slide, but it's interesting to note anytime you see the name Roma, the city, it's named from the goddess. Okay, obviously Rome's foundation comes from Romulus and Remus, but the name Roma then comes around the goddess Roma. So another important goddess. Bacchus, important in Greek and Roman culture, he's the god of wine. He's the god of theatre. And you also have Mercury, who's the god of trade and the gods of thieves. He was also, as well as being a son of Jupiter, he's a messenger for Jupiter. And what you have there, as we look at the screen, in Mercury's right hand, or on the left hand side of the screen as we look at it, is something called the caduceus. Okay? Caduceus, the caduceus. And the caduceus you will often see now is that long pole that's winged and has two snakes wrapped around it, not to be confused with the sign of medicine, which is just a pole with one snake wrapped around it, but this caduceus is often used as a logo for a lot of IT and software and business solution companies these days, because again, it's seen as a symbol of trade, it's seen as a symbol of messaging, it's seen as a symbol of bringing good news. When Mercury came As well as being part of trade and being teased, Mercury was seen as sort of a trickster, or a man who could solve any problem, or a man who brought new ideas. And that's why you see a lot of new companies who innovate in things have this idea as well. Okay? So again, I'll be posting these. If you're looking at this video for Latin, it's just going to be seen for what was each god for, how did a family tree work, how was it messed up, how can you do that? Or if you're doing people in history around your Romans and you're talking about things like shrine and Roman religions, then this is very important that you know what sort of gods they pray to and that they base those ideas from the Greeks. Okay guys, thank you for listening. I'll post another video again soon.